Welcome to the Spirit-Led Podcast, your guide on a journey to full enlightenment in this beautiful life. I'm your host, Joan Hope Craig. Each episode we explore spiritual wisdom, life's purpose, and the profound impact of daily choices on our personal growth and the world. Well, welcome, Reuben. I'm so happy to have you.
I'm delighted to be here with you, Joan. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to introduce you to our listeners and let them know that when we talked briefly about what we would talk about on the podcast, I asked Reuben if he had a microphone to talk to the world, what would he say? And he said, make time for God. So I'm really excited about that topic. And Reuben Schooler is an ordained CSA minister, a Qi Gong practitioner, and an Ayurveda practitioner. He's a Yoga Alliance E-RYT 200 level instructor. And in 2008, he received his certification from the International Shivananda Yoga Vedanta Center as a yoga and mind-body therapist. He's a past presenter for the National Black Nurses Association and has run multiple workshops at Unity of the Triangle in Raleigh, North Carolina, strengthening the Black family and yoga studios in the Raleigh-Durham area. Since 2008, he's held a license with the North Carolina Board of Massage and Bodywork and later attained additional certifications as a medical massage practitioner and as a certified lymphedema specialist. Reuben also presents in health and wellness fairs sponsored by the public service sorority Delta Sigma Theta as an expert in yoga and wellness. And finally, he leads faithful group of students in yoga asana classes weekly at the local YMCA. We can learn a lot from you today. What I'd love to start with is your yoga and meditation story. What brought you to it and how did you get started?
My roommate from college would say he would come into our room sometimes and just find me sitting with my eyes closed and my legs crossed. So, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that I needed quiet and stillness. And inherently, that's what I did. So, whether I was remembering something, right, a tool. So, my roommate reminded me that, really, you started doing this in the 80s when we were in college. And then in the 90s, I formally started practicing yoga asana really as a way to heal myself, my body. I was an athlete. I played beach volleyball, did a lot of things. I used to run and be very active. And someone suggested, well, you may want to do some stretching and there's yoga classes. And the very first yoga class I attended, she had us all in a circle and we were doing the practice. And I just remember that sense of not only was I doing something healthy for my body, but there was this sense of unity and peace and awareness that I hadn't felt before doing any other type of exercise. So I knew there was something deeper. And I started, buying books on yoga, but I was looking at the pictures and I was, as as an athlete, I was trying to do the postures. And then one day, one of the books, Light on Yoga, I turned to the front and I started reading and I was like, oh, and then I recognized this is something I recognize. This is something it's in my consciousness that I understand and agree with. And so at that point, I just continued to practice yoga. I got my certification to teach yoga. And then in 2005, I met Reverend Sam Sessu, which I know was on your podcast. And I was encouraged to come hear him speak. He was visiting a friend. He has family in the United States. He's a Ghanaian, but I met him. Someone said, "Oh, you want to listen to this guy? He's really good, and I think you two would connect." And so I went to hear him speak at Unity of the Triangle, and she was right. I heard him seamlessly integrate right living, spiritual living, moving, eating, all of these things into one beautiful talk. And I had never heard that before. A lot of talks you hear that, they're in your head and you're thinking, and sometimes it's, if you're in a class, it's like do this, but this was everything all together about, you know, how these things are all one, really. At that point, I knew I had met my teacher. And so I was encouraged. I came home, I was very excited, speaking with my wife, and I was like, this, he said this and that, and it was just like all the things I've been studying, and it seems like it's all come together. And she said, well, why don't you go talk to him and meet with him? And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't do that, she said, well, why not? Didn't your friend invite him here to the US? And don't you know her? Can't you just call and say, I'd like to come over? And so I did, but I was taken under Sam's wing. Of course, he was happy to teach me. He pointed me to CSA. I attended seminars there and meditation seminars. And when he would come to the US, of course, I would be right by his side. And I did many trips to Ghana to be with him in his clinic and at his church. And I guess the rest is history. And here we are, right? Here we are. So,
Oh, thank you for sharing that. You filled in a few details I hadn't heard before, and maybe even though we have had Reverend Sasu on the podcast, I think it may be worthwhile just to explain for people who don't know, the Kriya Yoga guru lineage started way
mm,
back, Mahavatar Babaji, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar Paramahansa Yogananda, who's probably the most famous Kriya yogi in our
hmm
time because of his book, Autobiography of a Yogi. And then our teacher, Roy Eugene Davis, and
yes,
Sam Sasu was Roy Eugene Davis's disciple. So it's like Roy Eugene Davis, I've heard this phrase, he's your param guru. He's like your
right.
grandfather.
That's right. That's right.
Your grandfather guru. Yeah.
Yes. And I got to spend some very nice quality time with Roy, and just being in his presence and being with Sam at the same time. It's undescribable. It's just an experience of a lifetime to just be able to study under and be in the presence of advanced souls such as theirs. So I feel very honored and blessed in that context.
I'd love to challenge you a little bit to say, can you try to describe it? Because you said it's indescribable, but when you're
Yeah.
around, now you're preparing to go to Ghana soon. So maybe
Mhm.
tell us what's that going to be like? What's that time with Reverend Sasu going to be like for you?
It's always a very full experience in the sense that your mind, your body, and spirit, the heart, everything just tends to be not only more heightened, but and awake and open. It's almost like you're immediately in this safe space where you feel free to be vulnerable, you feel free to be, and we should always try to be in our authentic self, right? But it's almost like when I'm in Sam's presence or when I was in Roy's presence, you drop out of your thinking mind. You don't even have to think about it. You're there and everything falls away. Everything else falls away. You are home is the best way to put it. You just go right into the heart. You're home. You're safe, and it opens you up just to a different level of learning because there's just no guards, there's no pretense. Like you introduced us in the beginning, we had these professional lives, and that comes with some level of formality, and all of that just falls away, right? It just falls away, and it allows you the freedom to then be able really to connect with yourself, and then ultimately with that ultimate reality when it comes.
That's a beautiful description. Thank you. I was reflecting on times that I've been at CSA on retreat, and sometimes I've met people there very briefly,
Hmm.
because you're there to be inward, but that bond is deep because I think we are in that state of, we don't bring all of our outworldly identity with us. We just come there to be. and connect on that level. So thank you for sharing that. You said what you wanted to share was about making time for God. So tell us more about what that means to you and how it showed up in your life.
That's been an evolutionary process for me. Um, I think spirituality and spiritualism, there a lot of times we don't leave ourselves room for growth. There's a lot of judgment if I'm not here by here then, or if I don't understand this or that or the other, or if I'm not feeling this at a certain time, I'm not getting it. And we really tend to not be not so kind to ourselves, I guess. So I would say start from the inside out. Um, One of my favorite things to do is from the moment the conscious mind kicks in for me, when I open my eyes and I'm coming out of whatever dream state or deep sleep state that I'm in, I take a deep breath and I just go to my heart. And then I just take another deep breath. And once I feel like, okay, and then I ground myself. I hear three things. I see three things, and I move three things in my body just to kind of ground myself because sleep is a connecting time with divine spirit, I believe. And so sometimes you just waking up, jumping out of bed, we haven't really prepared ourselves for our day. So I start there in the heart from the inside out. And then as soon as my feet hit the floor, I'm grateful that my feet are hitting the floor. I just have a sense of gratitude. It's like, wow, this is great. This is awesome. Another opportunity to move about this world in 2 feet. And then I get down on all fours and I move my spine and I wake my spine up. I do whatever little bit of asana and light stretching feels right for my body, just honoring my body. And then I do, maybe one or two or three things a part of a daily routine. Routine in Ayurveda is something that really helps us to stay connected to spirit. If we say that, right? If we say, this is just another way that I stay connected with spirit, I believe a lot of times, again, in that judgment of ourselves, doing things for ourselves sometimes feels selfish, or people will talk about self-care, and immediately it's like, okay, I know I have to take care of myself, but what about this? What about that? And then I'm just reminded that if we're not taking care of ourselves, that's actually very selfish because as ministers, as fathers, as mothers, as sisters, as friends, as counselors, as yoga teacher, the world needs us and they need us to show up. So it's very selfish not to take care of yourself because when you're out and when you're down and out, then how many people have you impacted that day? Um, so the body is always going to ask for a time of rest. And sometimes when we don't do that and we don't honor that, then it will make us rest, right? And those are the times we don't necessarily like so much because we're stuck in bed and then we're thinking about all the things that we want to be doing and we're just there and we're not feeling well. So making time for God for me means just starting from the inside, making time for yourself, and then working your way out into the world. And then just saying, when I leave the bedroom or leave the house, how am I going to be of service today? And what's today's miracle going to be? I always find a miracle. If you expect a miracle every day, it'll happen, no matter how small or how large, it'll be there. And so to me, it's just this constant looking for, right? Being in the presence of, starting with me, starting with the heart, being in the presence of, and then once I'm walking around in the world, looking out to see where God is showing up and how God is showing up for me. So I don't know if that answers the question very well, but I guess it's kind of a continuum for me. Making time is just having that routine and starting from the heart, working from the inside out, and then seeking God in whatever I do and whoever I encounter and whatever my day brings me.
Thank you so much. and one of the things that I hoped would come out in our interview, even though I didn't put it in the questions, is coming out. Because when I met you last year or earlier this year, what I felt in your presence, Reuben, was embodied calm. And
Mm,
I think what you just described is exactly what making time for God is for you. It's, oh, it's in me. God is in me. God is expressing as me. And so you start your day with your breath, moving your body, taking care of your physical needs. And then you proceed in a very practical way of looking for the good, looking for what things to be grateful for. And I think the word God comes from the same root as good, actually.
mhm.
I think I remember Roy writing that and saying that. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that embodied calm wisdom that we make time for God when we make time for ourselves, lowercase s and capital S. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Talk to me about when this shift happened, or was there a shift? Have you always been like that? Or was there a time in your life that you weren't? And what happened to help you get to this place of calm now and making time for God?
Well, I think there was definitely a catalyst. My father made his transition when I was in my 20s. So I was very young, and he was in his 60s, his early 60s at the time. And I just had the sense that, it was just too soon, that I felt like, right, I still needed him in my life. I still had questions, and I was just figuring out what being an adult meant. And I didn't have the opportunity like some adults, like you have your mother or your father and you actually have adult conversations with them finally. And I was like, wow, it just seemed too soon. And so, and my father and that side of the family in general, self-care was not a thing. It was not a thing. He carried more weight than he should have. His diet probably wasn't the best. And the type of cancer that eventually, well, the way it started could have been prevented if it were caught early. So that's a call out for colon cancer and which can progress into different areas of the body if it's unchecked. So we should be very aware of things like that. And so from that day forward, um, I made a decision. I'm just going to take better care of myself. And I just look for tools and ways to do that. And so it was definitely a slow, steady march. I would say first to just the awareness of that feeling of like I didn't feel like I had enough time. And then, okay, well, if it was too early for him, what can I do then to assure that I'm going to be around long enough? And I didn't know what the fill in the blank was at the time, right? But I just knew, okay, well, if in the future, I'm needed, what can I do, right, to make sure that there's better longevity? So there was definitely a catalyst there as far as, making ways or finding a path towards wellness, which then kept going, like I said, progressed into the story, my introduction that I was getting to in the beginning.
Let me ask you this. When you described yourself in college sitting cross-legged with your eyes closed and then, being an athlete, always being physically active and then of course this phase where you said, okay, I'm really gonna take care of my health. At that point in your life, did you have like spiritual curiosity too, or did that come later as an evolution of all these things you were practicing? Like I think there's a saying like there's just different doors into the same truth. And so I wondered, when did you start to be curious about spirituality?
This is to me another indication. The word that you used is curious because I'm remembering when you asked me initially if I had, um, a topic or microphone that I wanted to speak to the world. But one of the next thing that came to mind to me was stay curious. So that has not so that and I, this question is great because I grew up. So my what I didn't say is my father was a minister. He was a Baptist minister, and I grew up in the church. So I was very familiar with the church. But I was the kid eventually. I would listen. I would listen very intently. And from time to time, I would go, I'm not sure about that. Or I wonder what the backstory in that is. Or what happened after that? Because a lot of times, in church and in religions and spiritual communities, we get sound bites, bits and pieces. But I was always the guy, or I was, well, not always, sometimes I was just a teenager, sometimes just a kid, but there were definitely some very poignant times when I thought to myself, there's something else has to be, well, why did he do that? Why did he even go there, right? So I always wanted to know the backstory, and also the future story, and also why some things didn't seem to connect, you know. Well, if that happened and he said this, then why does this happen? So the curiosity actually is something that I think is important as far as spirituality and growth is concerned, is to stay curious, and ask questions, even if it's who am I? What am I? In meditation, as a meditation from time to time, and just drop deeply into that, no matter how advanced we are as meditators or as ministers. There's always something, right? And so we're here, right? So just the who am I, and who am I is sometimes a very good question. But yeah, that curiosity is definitely something that led me on a path. And I did, as a young man, I did a lot of things young men do, and I sought enlightenment through alcohol and some drug use, and just and same kind of curiosity, but how can I tap into more esoteric and undescribable realms? I think a lot of spiritual seekers are seeking that, and they turn to physical substances for that, either because of something just that they've read maybe, or just inherently they have a feeling about it. They try it and they're like, oh, wow, this is opening some door. Um, so yeah, there was definitely a time period in there for me when, I was involved with all of that. Eventually, again, you know, if you're fortunate, and being a black male in the United States, I feel like very fortunate, to be here today, made it through all that time and to have found my way to where I am now. So trust me, I'm very honored, pleased, and delighted to be sitting here and sharing with you today.
I love that you shared about how you felt as a youth in church. And I've had other guests say that as well, and me too. And I think what I'm grateful for is that yoga, if we go to the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita, I mean, those answers are there. The questions that you
Mhm.
were asking about, well, why did Jesus do that? And what was the big picture? And I think yoga
Right,
really gives us the big picture. And
right.
especially I feel grateful for our lineage because it is so clear. There's not any fluff or extra. It's funny. I have a friend who wrote a book called Everything You Need to Know About Composting and Nothing You Don't. But I feel like Kriya Yoga is everything you need to know about God and spirituality and nothing you don't. There's no extra fluff or confusing side paths to go down. So I'm grateful for that. And it sounds like when you met Reverend Sasu for the first time at that talk, it was that moment of like, oh, this is someone that can help answer my questions, and all the little things I've been curious about in my life. Might not have the answers right now, but is starting to see, you were starting to see the big picture.
Absolutely. You summarized that, and your perception is right on with that. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a little bit about the body, and I wanted to just give you a chance to share if there was something else you wanted to share with the listeners about Ayurveda and yoga asana or other forms of physical practice, because you mentioned Qigong as well, and you've done massage, lots of different things. Are there any other things you want to talk about as far as that and making time for God or other tips?
Kind of going back to how I was describing how I start my day, I I think the practical advice of just having a routine like that, in Ayurveda, it's called a dinacharya, or just a daily routine, and having a routine, a set time, to go to bed or to end or to meditate, and when you have your meals and when you eat your meals, there's a wealth of information in Ayurveda, and I know Roy has written a book on it. I know one of your guests is a practitioner in Tennessee, is an Ayurvedic practitioner. I do some consultation work with local clients here on Ayurveda. So it's just, I would say, can be curious, but the knowledge is there. Like you were saying, everything that you need to know about God, but none of the fluff. Um, Really the same thing. Just stay curious. And if you are, at a point where there's a challenge here or there, just know that that knowledge is there. This organization and this practice that we do has helped so many people. And if you're spiritually curious, I would just invite folks to dive a little bit deeper and just follow some of the practical advice you give about just going to the CSA Davis link. And also, um, I mentioned also the thing about looking for today's miracle. And I think that's really important. And it comes when you expect it and when you look for it, it comes like every day. And my mother-in-law's visiting right now, and I was speaking to her about that. And she was asking me, well, what do you think about these political times and this and that and all the things that are happening and people who don't really, seem to care about, decency and morality and justice and, how do we deal with that? And of course she asked me this, right? But, I was about to get ready to go have lunch with somebody and I was like, oh, okay. So this is a time to make time for God right here on my, so I right. So there God was needed, asking me a question. And, is this for practice? Is this for me to understand? Or is this for me so that I have a really good feel in my own head about how this works? And because of our practice and our lineage and the information that's available about the age that we're in and the maturity level of mankind and all sorts of things, I was able to, you know, really, I think, give a very salient, calm understanding and bring some peace of mind to her around, all the activities, right, that are happening around us, right? And we can definitely get caught up in it. But again, from within, then go out. And so sometimes just coming here and then having that understanding through the things that we've learned through yoga, through Ayurveda, sister science, the mind, the body, the spirit, is having that understanding and the knowledge through the readings and listenings. Um, that in itself, that removal of ignorance, and not as a negative connotation word ignorance, just lack of knowledge. And when you gain that knowledge, it brings you peace of mind. Just like I'm sure there was a day when um, someone heard, oh, well, you have this disease or that disease, and it was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do, right? But today, many of those things have been conquered, and we continue on this upward spiral, on this continuum. We know we're in an ascending age, so it'll continue to get better and better. And just knowing that again in itself having that optimism is another wonderful thing.
Actually, it's perfect timing. This interview is scheduled to go out January 1, 2025.
Ah,
And I just interviewed Catherine Love-K Geddes for December 1, 2024, and she talked about the yugas as well. And she said, we
ah,
are in spiritual kindergarten. But
right.
she's a former school teacher, so that was how
Thank
she
you.
worded it. And so
Thank you.
I love that that's the response you gave to your mother-in-law. And if I'm hearing you right, that was your moment, that was your miracle of the day.
Yeah,
You were
it
looking
was.
for when do I need to show up as my best self here and
Right,
be centered, and you found it.
right. That's right.
Well, you're
That's
actually helping me because I have a text I need to respond to from my mom. So I'm going
mm,
to look at that as my miracle.
there you go. There you go. It can be. Yeah, I remember I just, like I said, it could be big, it could be small. And we used to have a dog named Raleigh, and I called him Recycling Raleigh because I used to volunteer at the local museum. And there was a woman there with her. She also volunteers, but she had her daughters with her. And she would say to her daughters, how many times did you save the planet today? And they were talking about recycling. And I remembered that. And she said 10 times because, she had recycled 10 cans or 10 bottles. So when I would walk Raleigh, I would take bags with me, 2 or 3 plastic bags or whatever. And along the walk, we would just fill them up, right, with aluminum, with plastic, and just kind of clean up the way as we walked. And he got very used to this. He's like, oh, he would even point sometimes. Oh, there's one over there. Oh, Dad, you missed this one, right? And one day was just a particularly messy day for some reason. I filled up like 4 bags, and I'm walking with the dog, and I've got 4 bags, and I have about a quarter mile to get home. And there's a recycling thing right there. So I dump, so I don't have a place to put them, right? Uh, and there's more trash to come. And I just thought, I see more stuff. And I just thought to myself, gosh, if I had one more bag, I think I could finish. And then just then, like a tumbleweed, a plastic bag just blew gently in the wind and stopped right in front of the dog.
That was your miracle.
That was my miracle. It doesn't have to be anything, like profound. It was just like, oh, okay, thank you. And I filled up that last bag, and then when we got home, we dumped it all into the recycling bin. So, it can just be a little miracle like that.
I think it's delightful. It's a delightful way to approach life. And we are in challenging times. And I definitely have felt some anxiety, to be honest. I've felt some anxiety about the state of the world and, learning to calm that. And what I'm learning from all my guests and teachers is that it really is the little things that add up. It's the little daily practices we have to just keep doing our inner work. We have to keep making time for God. This is the time more than ever that we need to make time for God, and also to see that all of our time is God's and everything
Thank
we
you.
do is for God. But are there any other things you'd like to say to people who maybe don't feel religious or don't have a sense of God?
Absolutely. This may sound repetitive, but one, be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself, and then let that kindness and that sense of heart, you know, be in your home, right? And then let that sense be in your neighborhood. So there are just so many things that we can do just in those 3 areas. If you just start there, that make a big difference. A lot of times, many times, like you said, our minds want to go out, way out into problems that don't really exist for us, right? What's going to happen if that type of thing? But there's one thing that we always can control is like how we feel and how we interact with ourselves and even the conversations that we have with ourselves. So I would encourage everyone just to have nice conversations with yourself. Have nice conversations with yourself and then let those nice conversations continue out, to people in your home, to your pets, to your neighbors. Um, that type of consciousness, so you don't have to attach any word to it, is people like it. People like it, they like it better than other stuff, right? And so if we as individuals, I think, pay attention to how we show up for ourselves, for our homes, for our neighborhoods, uh, people pay attention to that. And, other folks are paying attention to that and they're watching you. Before you know it, you're maybe a role model or you're getting a certificate just for doing something nice in the neighborhood, like picking up trash, and you weren't looking for it, right? But rather than, I think start to think like, oh, I have to do this, I have to do something big, I've got to do something profound, I've got to do something to write my name in history. Well, do you? I had I was reading when I was doing my yoga teacher training. There was a book that we read. It was Living Your Yoga. And one of the key takeaways from that book, I remember, was just asking the question, it's like, this is that, asking the question, this is how it should be. And then saying, is it really? Right? So we might have a set pattern in our minds or influences from the outside telling us this, that, and the other. This is how it should be. This is how it should be. But, just ask yourself, is that how it should be? Can you really answer that question? Um, and take some time, I think, just to close your eyes and be in silence and just ask that question, who am I? Why am I here? Be curious. So it doesn't have to be big steps. Um, You don't even have to attach a name to it, and you don't have to go to, it's not necessary to say I'm a this or that or belong to that spiritual group or religion, but just start there. I didn't mention the G word in any of that. That or whatever name you want to attach to it, doesn't have to come up. And I believe that when the time is right, when the mind is right, when the heart is right, um, if you're curious, it's an evolutionary process. Like I said, it's an evolutionary process. So go with a child's mind into it and
Mm.
see what happens.
I'm picturing a bumper sticker. It says, "My religion is kindness." I think I've probably seen one like that, but that's what I'm hearing
Uh,
you say. And I love that simple advice. Just start with your own heart, your self-talk, and then your home and your community. And I also have Living Your Yoga on my shelf.
ah,
Judith Hanson Lassiter. It's a great book.
yes, that's it.
Yeah, maybe I'll link to it if people want to check that out. And it's about living the yamas and niyamas
Mhm.
and in daily life. And well, I'd love to take what you said about community and ask you to talk a little bit more about a project that you and I have discussed
Mhm.
that, you're recently retired. You have a lot of visions and a lot of ideas. And you mentioned, making a positive impact in your community. Would you share with the listeners about your vision for what's possible, even though I know it's not fully formed and you don't know exactly what shape it's going to take yet?
Right, I'd be glad to. So in my retirement, I started a nonprofit called Well New World. And the idea of Well New World is to bring holistic wellness services, primarily in the form of education, to marginalized communities in urban areas. And so, Black and Brown communities specifically, because I recognize as a yoga teacher, as a spiritual leader now, this knowledge, which I again consider a wealth, you know, um, has not been made available or is maybe not as accessible to Black and Brown cultures. And much of that is because, my thought is that, well, the wellness services really aren't available. The talk about self-care, when we find ourselves in, higher income level communities, you hear conversations about acupuncture and about yoga, and folks can spend 10 or $15, on a yoga class, right? Which, to many communities is just like, that's just not attainable. That's a monthly bus pass. I'm going to go to one yoga class, or I'm going to choose between how I get to work and back. And so the idea is to begin to bring that knowledge into those communities. Again, it's not fully formed, the board is still forming, but finding a way, whether that's, through Zoom communications, whether that's partnering with local YMCAs or charter schools in the communities, to, bring that type of education to folks. So again, you have that self-care mechanism in place because, as our world, and I don't have the stats correct on this, but apparently, we as a country produce, it's like a voluminous amount of drugs and antibiotics and this and that and the other, most of which the animals are using the antibiotics. And and compared to the rest of the world, like we're using most of the drugs, and then some of them go out. But there's a lot of um, quick fix kind of things that are advertised, this and that and the other, to help us. And again, some of those things are attainable. Some of them are for folks if you can spend the money on it. But then, how safe are they? Right? But there's always, kind of going back to yoga and Ayurveda, there's always things that you can do for yourself, um, that you don't need another outside party to do. It's just gaining that knowledge on, what you can do to relieve stress, or what you can do in times of a migraine or a frozen shoulder. Maybe there is another way other than just taking a shot and a pill. So all of these little bits, and my hope is that, um, practitioners who specialize in these, yoga instructors and acupuncturists and naturopaths and osteopaths, um, all of those practitioners who believe and promote and work in those natural forms of healing will come to give their time into those communities, again, as education, and then maybe ultimately as service providers, so that it opens the door for that safer, less expensive type of treatment to be in that community, so that they can then, go about their days just doing the things that they need to do, not being in pain, not being stressed about it, and not having to rely on pills, to be honest with you. That's most of what has been promoted in our medical community. I won't call it a healing community, but our medical community as far as treatment. So.
What I'm hearing you say is that you really have a vision for, um, I think there's a term complementary and alternative medicine that's used, pretty widely, right? To see more of that um, education about it and access to those services in Black and Brown communities in urban environments in the United States. And so I really wanted to say it out loud on the podcast because maybe someone will hear and people can get together and start collaborating. I think it's a beautiful vision. And I think there are other people that also want the same and are probably doing, working towards that in other communities. So hopefully things will come to fruition for you locally. And it actually, as you were talking, when you first told me about this months ago, it made me wonder if you had seen a model in Ghana with Reverend Sasu, because I know he has an Ayurvedic clinic. If you had seen that model working of someone grassroots who knows everybody in the town, um, could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's that's really interesting. I actually hadn't connected those dots until you brought it up, and it's like you're absolutely right. That is exactly what Reverend Sassu, what Sam has done, is really bring not only a different type of spiritualism to Ghana, but a different type of healing into Ghana. And I have seen, I talked about little miracles and big miracles, but I've seen, working with Sam, I've seen big miracles. I'll just say that I've seen big miracles using natural medicine, using healing. If you have a passion for it, but then also a gift for healing, that is real. It can be a catalyst. So my thought system or belief system is, we are the catalyst. Healing only can come from the divine, but certainly as individuals, as communities, we're catalyst for that healing. So sometimes, or many times, we can direct individuals to that healing or put their minds and hearts in the right mindset to accommodate and open the door for healing. And then once they see, it's kind of like seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, right? They can begin to make that march towards healing. And I definitely, once you mentioned that, I was like, yeah, I see that in Sam and his community and what he does. And that probably was another big catalyst for me, wanting to bring that to the United States in a kind of a nonprofit model form.
As we're coming to a close, we've to maybe helpful just to recap, we've talked about making time for God. It starts in our own hearts, in our self-talk, in the way we treat our bodies, in the way we treat our family and our communities. It could have a ripple effect. As we talked about, we can look for daily miracles. And we've talked about the benefits of yoga and Ayurveda and other practices for holistic health. So, what else would you like to share with the audience, if anything, today?
Well, I would just say remember remember to be kind to yourself. We have a lot of stimulus coming from the outside that would have us think and do things to the contrary. And so, the music that you listen to, the shows that you watch, the interactions and the people that you're associating with, um, be diligent and um, mindful, right, of those things. Because being kind to yourself isn't just about self-talk outside. We're manifest in these bodies, and so there's always a propensity, right, to we're curious as well, just because we're here. So our eyes see things and we feel things, and we want to know more sometimes, but everything that's out there is not feeding our soul in a way that helps us to be kind to ourselves. And so I would just say, just be diligent and mindful of those things. And I don't know who said this first, but don't sweat the small stuff. That's one of the other things that we talked about, even if it's big stuff. Sometimes we can get caught up in the drama of sweating the big stuff rather than looking holistically at the big picture. So that's it.
Thank you. Would you, Reuben, be so kind as to close the podcast with a song or a prayer or a chant in any way, some words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with?
Lord, from reality, make me go towards reality. And I like to say that's like kind of the literal translation, make me go towards rather than take me to. So it's an indication that like spirit is directing you, here's the way, but it's still up to us to take that path, right? Rather than feeling like you're being pulled or led. So make me go towards reality from darkness, make me go towards light, from the mortality or material attachment of this world, make me go towards self-realization or immortality. Peace, peace, peace. So
Mm.
that's what I'll chant today. Oh, Om Asatoma Satgamaya Tamasoma Jyotir Gamaya Mityama Amritam Gamaya Om Asatoma Satgamaya Tamasoma jyotir gamaya. Nityama amritam gamaya. Om asatoma satgamaya. Tamasoma jyotir gamaya. Nityama amritam gamaya. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Thank you for tuning in to the Spirit Led Podcast. Special thanks to our producer, Monty Craig. Please subscribe to catch upcoming episodes. For support in your awakening journey, visit our sponsor, the Center for Spiritual Awareness at csa-davis.org. We offer online group meditations, classes, and in-person retreats at our headquarters in Lakemont, Georgia. Once again, that's csa-davis.org. Until next time, remember your pure essence of being an eternal relationship with the infinite.